Most people do not discover that the social world has rules until those rules have already been used against them. They live their whole lives believing that fairness is the operating principle, that goodness is rewarded, that loyalty is returned, that sincerity is met with sincerity. And then, one day, quietly, the architecture of that belief collapses. Not dramatically, not all at once. It collapses the way a structure collapses when you realize the foundation was never there. Slowly, then completely, then with an eerie calm. Friedrich Nietzsche did not invent cruelty. He did not invent manipulation or calculated betrayal or the careful architecture of appearances. He simply looked at these things directly, without flinching, at a time when everyone around him preferred to look away. He studied the courts of Renaissance Italy, the shifting alliances, the quiet eliminations, the men who smiled warmly at dinner and signed orders against you by morning, and he wrote down what he saw, not to celebrate it, not to create a manual for monsters, but because he understood something that most political philosophers before him had refused to acknowledge, that the world as it actually functions and the world as it is described in moral instruction are two entirely different places, and that navigating the former while believing yourself to be in the latter is not virtue. It is exposure. These 7 rules are drawn from that observation. They are not cruelty. They are not cynicism dressed in philosophical language. They are a map of psychological terrain that already exists around you, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not. And here is the thing Machiavelli understood that most people still resist. Refusing to learn the rules does not exempt you from them. It only means you play without knowing you are playing. And those who do know will always, quietly, have the advantage. There is a distinction that must be made before anything else. There is goodness without awareness, and it is fragile. It is the goodness of someone who extends trust without reading the room, who interprets deliberate pressure as misunderstanding, who keeps returning warmth to someone who has taken note of exactly how useful that warmth is to them. This is not virtue in the world as it operates. This is vulnerability with a beautiful name. And then there is goodness combined with strategic intelligence. The awareness of the terrain you are moving through, the ability to perceive what others are actually doing rather than what they are saying, the capacity to act from values while understanding that others may not share them. This is not corruption. This is survival with integrity intact. This is what Nietzsche was actually writing toward, for those willing to read him carefully enough. The first rule: never fight the game with innocence. Perception governs reality, not truth alone. The naive belief is that if your intentions are good, the truth will eventually surface. That people will come to understand what you actually meant, who you actually are, what actually happened. And so the good-natured person waits, patiently, hopefully, for reality to correct the record on its own. Nietzsche watched this happen repeatedly in the courts of Florence and Milan. He watched men of genuine capability and honest character lose everything, not because they were outmaneuvered on substance, but because they lost control of the story. Because someone else moved faster, shaped the narrative first, and by the time the truth was available, the verdict had already been rendered. He wrote that men judge by their eyes rather than their hands, meaning people respond to what they see and hear. not to what quietly exists beneath. The court of public perception does not wait for evidence. It rules on impressions, and the person who understands this moves differently. Not dishonestly, but with an awareness that the image you project is part of the reality you inhabit. To ignore this is not humility. It is surrender. Truth without perception is a letter that was never sent. The second rule, control what people see, not what you feel. Emotional transparency is a map to your vulnerabilities. There is a cultural story we tell about authenticity, that to be fully visible, fully open, fully emotional is a form of strength. And in certain contexts, between certain people, this is true. But Nietzsche was not writing about love or friendship. He was writing about power. And in the domain of power, emotional transparency does something precise. It hands others a map. It tells them what moves you, what frightens you, what delights you, what wound, when pressed, will destabilize you. The person who has learned to be strategic with emotional expression is not repressed. They are not cold. They have simply understood that the arena is not the therapist's room, and that in arenas where people are competing, every reaction you give is information that others will file and use. Nietzsche observed that the prince who lets others see his fear invites the very aggression he fears. The person who reveals their insecurity signals to calculating observers exactly where to apply pressure. And the person who learns to keep their emotional center private, not numb, but private, removes one of the most exploitable tools available to those who do not wish them well. Composure is not a performance. It is protection. What you protect internally, they cannot reach externally. The third rule: do not respond softly to deliberate harm. Weak responses train others to escalate. People confuse gentleness with principle. They believe that turning the other cheek is moral, and that responding proportionally is aggression. But Nietzsche observed something that history has confirmed repeatedly. When deliberate harm is met with softness, the one who caused the harm does not feel remorse. They feel permission. A soft response to a calculated boundary violation does not communicate your goodness. It communicates your tolerance for being violated. And the person watching, the one who just tested you, adjusts accordingly. They learn the boundary they crossed was not really a boundary. They learn that you will absorb, reframe, and forgive without consequence. And so they push further. Nietzsche was precise about this. Injuries must either not be delivered, or if they must be responded to, they must be responded to in a way that eliminates the incentive to repeat them. This is not cruelty. It is the understanding that behavior is reinforced by its consequences. You are not teaching people to fear you. You are teaching people that you are someone who takes deliberate harm seriously, and that knowledge changes the calculation they make before the next test begins. Soft answers to calculated harm do not demonstrate patience. They demonstrate permission. The fourth rule: never reveal all your strengths too early. Visibility creates targets before you are ready. There is a particular pleasure in being fully seen, in letting people know exactly what you are capable of, what you know, what you have built. It feels like confidence. It feels like offering yourself honestly. But Nietzsche understood something uncomfortable about this. Capability, fully revealed, changes how people relate to you. Some become allies, but others particularly those who are quietly competitive or who feel threatened by competence they cannot control, begin to calculate. They begin to ask, is this person a resource I can use or a threat I need to manage? And the person who has shown their full hand before the relationship is established has lost the ability to answer that question on their own terms. Strength disclosed prematurely is an invitation to those who prefer to neutralize potential rivals quietly before the rival understands the conflict has begun. The Nietzschean move is not false modesty. It is timing. It is the understanding that a person who reveals only what is necessary commands more strategic space than someone who has made themselves entirely legible. What they cannot fully see, they cannot fully counter. The person who shows everything has already told them how to proceed against them. The fifth rule: understand that respect and affection are not created the same way. Love is unstable. Respect is structural. Nietzsche asked one of the most famous questions in political philosophy. Is it better to be loved or feared? And his answer was precise. Feared, if you cannot have both. But the question he was really asking was different. Is it better to be liked or respected? Affection, he observed, is given freely and withdrawn freely. It depends on the mood of the person who holds it, on what you have done for them lately, on whether they are currently pleased with the world or not. It is a gift, and like all gifts, it can be taken back. Respect operates differently. Respect is generated not by being likable or pleasant, but by demonstrating that you have standards you will not abandon, positions you will actually defend, and a relationship with your own commitments that does not bend under social pressure. History is full of individuals who were universally liked and universally overlooked, who were invited to things but not consulted about things, who were pleasant company but not serious actors, and others who were not particularly warm but who commanded genuine weight, because everyone in the room understood that this person's word carried, that their displeasure had meaning, that their approval was not given lightly, and therefore meant something real. The desire to be liked is natural, but when it becomes the governing principle of behavior, it makes you legible in a way that stable respect never would. Affection is borrowed. Respect is built. Here is the question that sits underneath all of this. Why do people resist these ideas so strongly? Why does the mind recoil from them even when some part of the person has already seen the patterns they describe? The answer is not stupidity or naivety. The answer is psychological comfort. Because if the world actually operates on the principles Nietzsche described, if perception matters more than truth alone, if emotional transparency is exploitable, if soft responses invite escalation, then the social world, as most people experience it, requires not just new tactics, but a fundamental revision of the story they have been telling themselves about where they live. And that revision is threatening. It means reckoning with moments of past harm, not as misunderstandings or accidents, but as what they may have actually been: deliberate tests, calculated boundary violations, strategic erosions carried out by people who understood the game while you believed you were having a relationship. This is not easy to sit with. And so most people do not sit with it. They move back toward the comfort of the simpler story. But here is what Nietzsche was actually doing in those pages. He was not creating manipulators. He was writing to protect those who possessed goodness, but lacked the strategic awareness to defend it. He was writing to the good person who keeps getting hurt and cannot understand why. He was writing to say, "The problem is not your character. The problem is your map. You have been navigating a landscape you were never given accurate coordinates for. And that changes now." The sixth rule: never fight every battle yourself. Elevation is more powerful than direct confrontation. The instinct, when you are wronged, undermined, or threatened, is to confront it directly, to match force with force, to name what happened publicly, to make the conflict visible. And sometimes this is correct. But Nietzsche observed something in the patterns of power. Direct confrontation is often the least efficient method available, and it frequently costs the person who initiates it more than the person they are confronting. Because direct confrontation makes you a participant in the conflict rather than someone above it. It depletes your energy. It makes you reactive rather than deliberate. And it gives the person who provoked you exactly the elevated platform they may have been seeking. The more powerful move, the one that history's most effective operators understood intuitively, is what might be called elevation. To position yourself above the conflict through demonstrated composure, continued forward movement, and the accumulation of real capability and genuine alliance, so that the attack or provocation loses its weight, not because you destroyed it, but because your altitude made it irrelevant. Nietzsche understood that in court politics, the person who kept moving forward while others got mired in conflict almost always outlasted those who burned their energy in reaction. The goal is not to win every battle. It is to make the battles others pick against you increasingly costly for them while costing you very little. The person who keeps moving while others react has already begun to win. The seventh rule: master your emotional center. The ultimate defense is what others can no longer do to you. Everything before this rule has been about navigating the external landscape, about perception, about timing, about response and positioning. But the seventh rule is inward, because all the strategic awareness in the world becomes fragile if the emotional center it is built upon can still be reached. A person who understands perception but panics under pressure will eventually crack at the critical moment. A person who knows not to reveal their strengths, but who cannot manage their anxiety, will leak it in every interaction. The ultimate Nietzschean insight, one he returned to throughout The Prince and his discourses, is that the most dangerous dependency is internal instability. The person whose sense of worth is contingent on others' approval can be moved by the withholding of approval. The person whose confidence depends on external validation can be destabilized by its removal. The person who has not developed a durable relationship with their own judgment can be confused by deliberate misdirection. But the person who has built what might be called a sovereign emotional center, who knows their own values clearly enough that they are not narrated by other people, who has enough self-knowledge to recognize manipulation when it begins, who has learned to sit with discomfort without it becoming emergency. This person is, in the deepest sense, unreachable. Not because they feel nothing, but because what they feel does not become a lever others can pull. Nietzsche wrote that the prince who rules himself first rules everything else with greater ease. The internal order is the foundation. And when it is genuinely stable, the external provocations that once caused damage begin to do something different. They become visible, predictable, almost architectural in their obviousness. You can see them coming from a distance, name them for what they are, and decline to be moved. The deepest protection is not armor. It is clarity about what no longer has the power to reach you. What changes when someone internalizes these 7 rules is not their character. It is not their warmth or their capacity for genuine connection or their ethical commitments. None of that has to go. What changes is something more precise. They stop being surprised. The manipulation that once landed because it arrived in the costume of friendship becomes recognizable for what it is. The pressure that once destabilized them becomes information rather than threat. The calculated provocations that once caused sleepless nights become predictable enough to manage without emotion. And that change is not a hardening. It is a clarification. It is the particular stillness that comes when a person has finally stopped trying to navigate the world that was described to them and started navigating the world that actually exists. Nietzsche's great gift, the one that has been misread for 5 centuries as cynicism, as darkness, as the instruction manual of the malevolent, was not a celebration of power. It was a diagnosis of reality offered to those who were suffering, not because they lacked goodness, but because they lacked the map. The closing transformation this work points toward is quiet. It is not the satisfaction of defeating your enemies. It is something older and more durable than that. It is the moment when you realize that most of what once threatened you no longer can. Not because the world has become safer, but because you have become clearer. Because you have stopped lending power to things that were only ever powerful, because you did not yet see them plainly. And once you see them plainly, something settles. The particular anxiety of moving through a world you did not understand begins to lift, not all at once, not dramatically, but with the slow, solid certainty of someone who has finally been given the correct coordinates, and who is, for the first time, reading the map right.